Hello, our friends, Evolutionary Energy Arts family. As always, guys, want to thank everybody for their support at Patreon. Exclusives going up there, usually multiple times every week. Again, we welcome you to join the Patreon family, which is growing, and there's a lot growing in the world right now. And so here you see outrage. Trudeau defies Trump's pardon, detains a protester. In an unprecedented act of political vengeance, Justice Trudeau is ignoring President Trump's pardon for January 6 protesters and keeping a free man detained in Canada. Canada's border agency is holding the individual hostage, flouting international norms and thumbing its nose at U.S. justice. Brazen defiance raises serious questions about Trudeau's political motives and abuses of power. Why is Trudeau meddling in U.S. affairs and denying a free man his rights? Well, it's interesting because, again, I think a lot of people thought he was going to be stepping down like weeks ago, and it doesn't seem to be happening as quickly as many people would want. And then, of course, as we know, with 47 taking over and freeing the January 6 people, big changes are underfoot. Here you see, and I'm sure you've all heard, that 47 has said we may be a substantially enlarged country in the not-too-distant future. He then hinted at abolishing income tax, which we've been talking about, and moving back to tariffs. It sounds like his plan is to absorb somehow, purchase, or what have you, Canada and Greenland to become self-sustaining empire and one of the largest producers of oil and natural gas on Earth, and move back to a tariff-based system that incentivizes the purchase of U.S. goods and abolish income tax after the Department of Government Efficiency trims all the fat. So big changes, huge changes. In fact, again, the Gulf of Mexico literally will be renamed the Gulf of America on Google Maps. I grew up with Mount McKinley. I do remember Mount McKinley in Alaska, which has been called in more recent times Denali. It's going back to Mount McKinley after President McKinley. In fact, 47 has talked an awful lot about President McKinley, who in some people's history lessons, might not remember President McKinley so much. Certainly doesn't stick out like many of the others, like when we talk about, obviously, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, or the Roosevelts, both of them. Well, look closer. Look a little bit closer as you see Trump talking about the tremendous wealth that President William McKinley created with tariffs. The Tariff Act of 1887, before President McKinley was assassinated. Again, President McKinley was one of 4 presidents assassinated in office. He had actually just won re-election, was 6 months into his second term, and then was assassinated. So it's really interesting to see that it feels that he's modeling himself, or he's being modeled in many ways after President McKinley. The VP, by the way, was Teddy Roosevelt. Here you go. William McKinley, 25th President of the United States, number 25. You see again his first term. Protected manufacturers and factory workers with the Tariff Protection Act. Also, note the money. Gold Standard Act passed in 1900. He paved the way for Republican dominance to come for literally decades. It really was McKinley that paved the way and kind of changed a lot of things forever when it comes to the U.S. As you see there, for president, for vice president, remember Theo Roosevelt, bully. I can't forget that. The Spanish-American War happened during his presidency, and the Spanish-American War in itself is very fascinating, and it's something else that gets overlooked. As you see, Puerto Rico and Cuba belonged to Spain. They were under Spanish control. In reality, again, Great Britain, France, and Spain were pretty much the big three. Portugal also, as far as the expanding empires of the European monarchies that really laid the foundation for the world that we have now in so many ways. So the Spanish-American War happened at a time again before World War I, after the Civil War, and it was a period where the U.S. was kind of booming in many ways. Now, the Civil War did really literally bankrupt the U.S., who had to go borrow money from certain entities, wealthy entities, that, again, the Banking Act of 1871 lays the foundation for what was to come later on with the IRS and the Federal Reserve System, which was introduced to us with Wilson, President Wilson, Woodrow Wilson. You see here the Spanish-American War had more than one theater. You had the Caribbean theater, and again led to Spain being removed from being a major power there in the Caribbean, with Cuba and Puerto Rico being removed from their control. And also over in Asia, the Philippines were under Spanish control. In fact, if you go to the Philippines, again, the Spanish language dominates, and the culture is an interesting mix of Spanish and Asian. When you see the administration's promises have been kept, 1896 and then 1900, the first election and the second election, things really did change. There was a lot going on. There were all sorts of banking issues. You had Spain ruling Cuba and Puerto Rico, and now all of a sudden you had America in control in Cuba and in Puerto Rico, and also in the Philippines and places like Guam, which we have important military bases as well. So it really wasn't a war that took a lot of deaths, and it started with the USS Maine sinking February 15th, 1898. A lot of people point to this as one of the first false flags that we can look to in our more modern history, as it was blamed on Spain, but then turns out it doesn't seem like they really sunk it, but it didn't matter. There just had to be some sort of excuse. As you see, over 2,000 people dying of food poisoning and disease, but only 385 in battle. So what type of war was it? Well, again, it's all about appearances. It's all about what the final outcome becomes. And again, people that are patriotic by nature certainly make it easy for the control system to manipulate. And again, these patriotisms, they come and they go, just like nations come and go, empires come and go. And of course, they always sell it, and you could see honored and respected by all, enlist in the infantry. Yeah, sometimes in some periods it's outright for glory and God and for basically outward expansion in periods of time. Like, it seems like we're going back into that outward expansion. And the Spanish Empire, well, it's not really an empire anymore. How about the American Empire? Again, we've been looking to the growth of BRICS and the inevitable ascension of China to world dominance. Because, again, you follow the manufacturing and also the technology in China. We were just talking about yesterday with the AI and leading the world in AI. And then also it turns out Greenland has a lot of those rare earth minerals that are necessary for computers. Yeah. Also the fact that this was all part of a plan going way, way back. We remember the Club of Rome's maps that were showing Canada and Greenland being part of a North American Union going way back again 50 years. And here you have, again, the assassination of William McKinley. The highest peak in North America, Alaska's Mount Denali, was once named the namesake of President William McKinley, who never set foot in Alaska. But again, was called Mount McKinley by a gold prospector. and it's stayed. And this is a picture here of the assassin. Interesting. It was at the Pan American Expo, and when I see these expos, I mean, look at the Greco-Roman architecture. Again, it goes to the World Fair. It goes to saying these buildings, you know, were temporary, but they were grander and more beautiful than, you know, the buildings we see being put up today for the most part, with far more details. Well, on September 5th, McKinley toured the fair in Buffalo, the exposition. After giving a speech, Solzgos, I guess is how you would say it, Solzgos was in the crowd. This is again the assassin, or at least what we're told is the assassin, as that it was basically something that was watched by many people. Would likely be the case, but you know, you really got to wonder what technology was available back in those days that, you know, could hide who a person really was, and even things like MK Ultra, which came many decades later. But the reality is, again, as we've been sharing, the technology, especially AI, that has been in place for far longer than most humans have a clue. So he was in the crowd, decided not to attempt anything as he was being jostled, and hitting the president would be difficult. He tried to get close afterward, but was pushed away by security. The next day, McKinley was scheduled to take a trip to Niagara Falls before returning to Buffalo. After returning to Buffalo, he attended a grand reception at the Temple of Music, where he greeted thousands of people who lined up to shake the president's hand. He was in the crowd waiting for the chance, and when he got to the president, with his gun concealed in a handkerchief, he pulled the trigger twice. It was 4:07 p.m., and the president lurched forward as onlookers gazed in horror. Turns out one of the bullets hit a button and didn't even penetrate. The other one did penetrate. He was taken to surgery, and it looked and appeared that it was going to be successful, but he seemed to be in recovery. But however, toxins in his blood caused by gangrene resulted in infection that put the president back into critical. And in the early hours of September 14th, the 25th president of the United States died. Later on, the assassin was sentenced to death by electrocution, which was carried out on October 29th, 1901. Curious, to say the least. You know, you got to wonder. It makes me think of so many movies we've seen where somebody tries to take somebody out by assassination, and it doesn't really work. So they go back in and they disguise themselves as a medical doctor or a nurse and administer something that it's going to look kind of natural, but it's not natural, just to make sure that the job gets done. This is a picture of the assassin there. Fascinating. His, meaning McKinley's, presidency was extremely significant, even though he's one of the ones that many people would not really even think of. You know, his whole time that he was trying to become president, he did it basically, they say, from his front porch in Ohio. Didn't really even go out and press palms and, you know, do the usual campaigning. But here you go. What happened during his presidency? The U.S. gained control of Hawaii, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. Absolutely did restore prosperity after a very deep depression, and rejected the inflammatory money prices of free silver, keeping the nation on the gold standard, and raised all these tariffs. So very curious indeed, and makes you wonder if there's more than one reason for 47 always referring to himself in a McKinley light. As always, guys, we look forward to your comments. Thank you for your support. Join us on Patreon for exclusives. Source bless, and namaste.